everybody into Madison Alley TV's Executive Lounge. We are so excited today to welcome our guest, Bonin Bough. So without further ado, I would love to introduce you to our host today, Michael Seidler, who is the founder and CEO of Madison Alley Global Ventures.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Really excited for our fireside chat today in the Executive Lounge, and very excited to talk to Bonin Bough. Bonin is the founder and chief growth officer of Bonin Ventures and has had an illustrious career, which we will learn all about here today. He's the former chief media and e-commerce officer of Mondelēz. Prior to that was a former chief digital officer at PepsiCo and has been awarded numerous accolades, some of which include Advertising Hall of Achievement, Fortune's 40 Under 40, Fast Company's 100 Most Creative People in Business, Ebony's Power 100, and those are just a few of the honors and awards. Bonin, really delighted to have you here and excited to hear your story. Thanks so much for being here.
It's my pleasure, sir. Thank you for having me, and thank you everybody who's out there listening. I know it's a nice evening, and so well, it depends on where you're at in the world, I guess, right? I happen to be in Miami, but I am going back to cold New York later. So, but anyway, just thank you guys for tuning in.
Okay, great to have you. Is there a beverage of choice that you have for today's session?
Well, you know, you told me that I needed to have one, and usually I would have a scotch, but it's a school night, so I decided to grab a glass of champagne so I could toast you for having me on this show where you've had so many other great luminaries, and also toast everybody who's joining.
Appreciate it. Well, I have my green tea matcha here. It's a school night, so cheers to everyone. So first, we'll just begin with an overview of Madison Alley Global Ventures, a snapshot of us. Most of you know us by now. We are a strategic M&A and capital advisory group and have been disrupting the sector for nearly 20 years now. We were actually the first M&A and capital advisory group exclusively focused on the digital marketing, media, and ad tech sector. And we're led by former strategic buyers and investors based here in New York City, with presence in Silicon Valley and in San Diego. We're typically raising capital between $10 to $150 million, and with M&A transactions from $25 to $500 million. We are reimagining and really disrupting the way that M&A transactions are done, fueling telling stories for clients and in pursuant to strategic, impactful M&A transactions. And so the likes of Madison Alley TV, having luminaries like Bonin Bough and other global CEOs and chief marketing officers across the marketing, media, and ad ecosystem, and building an elite global network of distinguished leaders, luminaries, and advisors in this and founders in this sector. So without further ado, we will jump into our agenda today. First, we'll learn a little bit about who is Bonin Bough, and we'll understand how is it that Bonin has had such tremendous impact on the industry. Then jump into his experience at PepsiCo, reimagining its brands as chief digital officer. Then at Mondelēz, as you transform many of the brands there. Learn a little about Bonin Ventures. And then, Bonin, we know that you're very passionate about equitable ownership and through your work through Lockstep Ventures with Michael Loeb. So, love to hear more about that. And then, hear about the hackonomy and Bonin, hear your view on hacking the future. We'll finish off with some Q&A and appreciate all of the questions that have been submitted by our registered attendees. So with that, we'll begin with a little sizzle reel, if we might, on Bonin himself, and let's jump right into that video.
Alan Kay says that the best way to create the future is to invent it, but Bonin Bough says the best way to create the future is to hack it.
Bonin Bough of Bonin Ventures.
He was the former chief media and e-commerce officer at Mondelēz International and has been listed in Fortune magazine's 40 Under 40, Fast Company's 100 Most Creative People in Business.
He is currently the host of Cleveland Hustles with LeBron James Production.
So we have the great Bonin Bough that's given his leadership on and helping me out with it all.
He created some of the first marketing programs across Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and so many others.
He's been named Mobile Marketer of the Year by the Mobile Marketing Association.
He is never at a loss for words.
We have become the most distracted society in human history. And this idea of the singularity, where there's a rupture in the fabric of human evolution, might actually come true. We're not realizing the impact that it's actually having on society.
So I've always worked in billion-dollar businesses.
My job was to buy all of the media across the globe, about $2 billion in media, and also grow our billion-dollar e-com business, which I took from $60 to $260 million in 18 months.
And so what I learned was that there's a lot of things that we can do from a big business standpoint in terms of what we've learned to help small businesses grow. And just because they're a small business doesn't mean that they need to think small.
Sometimes we forget how important brands really are to people.
Because it doesn't matter what we want. What matters is what the consumer wants.
Talent will be the largest determinant of growth of an organization by 2030. And yet, many organizations don't focus on how do they create this next generation of leadership. Because guess what? The world is moving too fast to be stuck where you were yesterday.
You owe it to yourself and to the brand to feel excited, inspired. You want to connect with the best thing. And that's what I argue we have to do.
It's one thing to say, I aspire to be a great marketer. It's another thing to actually invest behind it.
Well, thanks, Bonin. It's inspiring, and I love your the energy that you bring and the disruption that you're bringing, and even just the mindset that you bring to the brands and companies that you work for, but more importantly, I think to the industry and to all the people and leaders within it. So we look here at your illustrious career, extremely impressive, beginning at or at least first level of prominence, let's say Chief Digital Officer of PepsiCo. You then went on to Kraft, running global media and consumer engagement. Mondelēz, the Chief Media and E-commerce Officer. And then some of these other really notable achievements. Obviously, you work with Cleveland Hustle, with Hustles, with LeBron. Maybe just talk a little bit about, let's talk about Sundial for a second. You had a tremendous impact, as I understand it. You built it to about over $200 million in revenue. Sundial was ultimately acquired by Unilever for nearly $1 billion. Could you talk a little bit about your experience there, and then we'll jump to some of these others?
Yeah, I mean, I know we're going to talk about equitable ownership. What was amazing about Sundial was, first off, it was Black owned, and it was I will say, and quite honestly, I feel embarrassed to say this, having been, at the age I was when I first met Sundial, it was the first time that I had ever seen a Black owned business of that scale. And what was more impressive was the amount of, diverse people who were employed by Sundial, family owned, the ethic behind it, and really what they accomplished in terms of beauty. I mean, they were the largest natural beauty business that was built over 25 years, and they broke down so many of the stereotypes and barriers that faced the beauty industry. Everything from where products were housed, who they were allowed to service. So just because you're a Black-owned business doesn't mean that you can only sell products to Black people. The fact of the matter is that 70% of women have textured hair, and these products were created for textured hair and different skin types. The speed and pace of innovation that they were able to create that I had never seen before, the ability to truly analyze and understand the unique needs of all types of diverse customers and to create products and innovation that met those. So there was so much learning at Sundial. And I think the biggest learning was a leadership organization that valued speed, over fear in many respects. And what I mean by that is that they were afraid to stand still, not happy to maintain the status quo. And so what we were able to do, and that's, when I came in, Richelieu Dennis and his family, I said, look, I didn't really want to come back into the CPG world. I had just actually left Mondelēz maybe a year later to invest in messaging technology. Before I quit, I had met Michael Loeb, and I had this idea that messaging tech, I was living in China. I was watching WeChat grow, and I wanted to go do, invest in messaging tech and become rich. Well, on that journey, I met Richelieu Dennis, but a year later. But, and I had asked Michael, I said, look, we were at his house. For those of you who don't know, if you watch the show Billions, that's his house in Billions. And so we're at his house, and I met him at an event, and I said, hey, here's my idea to invest in message tech. He said, well, let me ask you two things. One, can you get the same job if you quit now? I said, probably somewhere. He goes, do you have any money saved up? I said, well, I don't have a house in billions, but although I'm not impressed, when your house in trillions, then call me. Everybody's got to be. But more important, I said, I got a few pennies. He said, well, you owe it to yourself to follow your dream. And I quit, invested in message tech, and I, accumulated a pretty good portfolio. And when I met Richelieu, I said, look, if you let me turn it into a technology company, then I'm down. And that's what he allowed us to do. And that's what created a lot of the value, as well as the innovation process. And hence the reason why Unilever is a proud owner of the business today.
Okay, awesome. So I'd love to dive into a lot more of that, especially the mobile tech. And I know that you've been really diving headfirst and really taking lead, and even won, mobile marketing of the year. I'd love to hear, even from the beginning, what we have here first is your chief digital officer of PepsiCo. But how did you even rise to the prominence of that position? Can you tell us about the backstory of how you even got there?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, everybody, it's interesting because I talk about careers, and I share that most people have if I ask you for the strategy for your product or service, you'd show me a 50-page PowerPoint. Right. I asked you the same exact thing for your career, you probably don't have anything. And the craziest things are there are more elite athletes in the world than there are vice presidents of Fortune 10,000. So if you think it's easy to become or hard to become LeBron, it's near impossible to become Indra, for example. And the walls of organizations are littered with those that said, I'm going to make it to CEO, but they didn't have a plan. They didn't get there. And so one of the big things, which is not on that slide, that I'm very proud of, is we created it was kind of like a side gig during those jobs. We created a thing called Brand U, which was a talent accelerator, but really taught lessons that I had learned in my career, many of them starting at PepsiCo. But before that, look, I was a nerd in high school. I went to college I was a programmer at 12, went to college to become a physics engineer. So I studied physics and then poli-sci. My school had a 3-2 program with Columbia, and I was supposed to go do engineering, fell in love with political philosophy. 4 years later, graduated with the dual degree, but with a focus on political philosophy and a chance to go to Columbia for my graduate in political philosophy. And I thought I was going to be a teacher. My dad was a teacher, a photographer. I thought that. And that summer, we actually created our first web company actually in college, and we did the first Jordache website, the Jordache look, but we sold that. But that summer I came home and I say sold it, for as much as you can sell a business in college. But I came home and I wanted to make some money during the summer. And so I freelance program at like ProxyCom and Razorfish. And I ended up at a web party, and there was a vodka fountain and a shrimp boat. And I said, oh my God, this is the industry for me. And so I ended up landing at a company called Rooter Finn, family-owned business. And they asked me to build out their interactive group, and I built out Rooter Finn Interactive alongside Scott Schneider. Scott at the time had a young family, so he never wanted to travel. So I traveled the world and opened up our San Francisco office, Europe, our Asia at a very young age. We were right into the bubble. So everything collapsed. Our biggest business was pharmaceutical. And the one thing that stays good, no matter how bad the times are, is pharma. So as the big guys collapsed, we started hoovering up everybody. At one point, we were the largest developers of intranets in the pharmaceutical industry. And then that branched out. Then we became consumer. Then we had Kellogg's. And, and all of a sudden, 7 years later, we were competing, and we were, a pretty big powerhouse. But during that journey, because we were a true dev shop, but we still had the heritage of the PR agency. So we created a bunch of innovative products that got us a lot of recognition. We launched a thing called Mr. Picasso Head, which was user-generated Picasso pictures. We won South by South development of the year or whatever it was. So we did a lot of innovation, and I began to, I think, get noticed around that time. I also tried to make sure that I put myself out there. I left there and I went to IPG. And at IPG, I ran Media Lab alongside Bant Breen, and we did the first investment in Facebook from a holding company.
Yeah, I remember that.
Right. We did what was called Social Vibe, Joe Marchese's business then. And then I also built Weber Shandwick's digital practice, which is still probably one of the preeminent digital practices in a PR agency to this day. And I grew that, I think, to 280 people from maybe 40. And I did that for 2 years. And and again, we drove a lot of innovation into the marketplace. And that's always been my thing. And then PepsiCo called, and, I said, well, I'm going to leave the agency side because I thought clients were too dumb to buy good work. So I became a dumb client. And, you know, when I walked into PepsiCo, now it's called digital transformation. Then it was called, oh, what is this Facebook thing? You know, it was a totally different ball game. But what Pepsi gave me the chance was to truly kind of have a global platform where we could push the envelope. And again, leadership that was very open. Indra's a good friend till this day, that was very open to being at the forefront, the cutting edge, as long as we could show business results. And we did so many of the firsts. I mean, we built the first ever corporate incubator, startup incubator where startups meet brands, called Pep 10. We built we built Mission Control to reinvent Gatorade, which was a glass room in the center of the Gatorade marketing floor that had visuals of consumer conversations on 6 different screens, people engaging in real time. It became kind of par for the course, both of those later on. We were the first to do it. We did the first ever user-generated beverage on Facebook, which became the #1 LTO that we ever had, called Democracy. I mean, just the amount of things that we put into market, but we also proved that they drove business. And I think more importantly, we gave air cover for all of those that were trying to do this to have examples of people that were doing it. We did the first South by Southwest. I'll never forget my first South. I've been going for years, 10 years maybe. I think I've been for 25 years. And this just shows, like, on the agency side, I couldn't get clients to buy into it. So the first big activation I did, which was 3 months in at Pepsi, was South by. And when we went there, we were the first non-endemic brand there. In fact, Interactive couldn't even use the whole convention center. It was only half the convention center they could fill. But it was like LinkedIn, Microsoft. So we came in as a consumer brand, took over all 3, film, music, and digital for $150,000, man. And we brought Fast Company there and called it the Davos of digital. We built, you know, the grill, we brought ink, we brought brand innovators, we brought, you know, and just turned it into like this landing place where what we knew was there were internet voices there that if we could show innovation, they would amplify our messages. And we were always trying to make sure that we were understanding and learning what was at the forefront so that we could bring it back into the business, but also so that we would be the first port of call for innovation. We became the brand to call if you had digital innovation or different types of digital thinking. And I prided myself on trying to say yes more than I, you know, just trying to find out how to say yes and never ever trying to really say no.
That's awesome. I mean, South by Southwest, actually, creating a lot of experiential moments in a very digital audience. So in fact, it wasn't actually digital experiences that you're talking about, but just making an impression on a digital audience that obviously got amplified, as you're saying.
Well, I mean, for me, it was actually digital experiences. For me, because I appreciated the audience so much, like this had become my family. And I went there with 3 rules, which was, do no harm, add value, and be ready for critique. And that's I mean, look, these are very snarky people too. So, So we did no harm. We weren't taking advantage of the event. We were making it better. The first thing we launched was a thing called the PepsiCo Zeitgeist. And really what it was we aggregated all the feeds from because one of the things I realized from going was that what was hard was to know where the good parties are. And more importantly, where are the good, well, maybe not more important, but where are the right panels, where are people congregating? So we basically just took a bunch of the Twitter feeds, at that time, the Foursquare feeds. The next year, we actually brought Foursquare with us. And we turned into the Zeitgeist app where you could see where conversation was happening, where people were congregating, and it became the app, of South by. The next year we went there, and that was for us to do our listening and learning. That became the base technology for Gatorade Mission Control. And then the next year we went there, and that was all about what would be the future of how people gave you digital data and how you would use that digital data. So one of the things we took over that Atrium piece. Again, this was before people were doing a ton of outside activations. We took over the Atrium piece, and we had this flipboard that looked like a train flipboard. And then we had all of these people. We gave away, I think, 400 books or something like that with these pens, these digital pens that you would upload USB, and they had these books. And the books in the digital pen would register when you wrote in the book, and you would click what the page was. And so we had people saying, okay, what kind of facial recognitions are you seeing here? How many mustaches? What are the best panels that you're seeing? What are the, how would you rate these, all these different things and we basically had people go out and figure out information and data that was happening across South by. Then we had these screens all across South by, and at that time, it was a new technology, which was recognition. So our ads would then change based on who walked by, data and information we had, and then we would show you in real time what we were doing and what we were changing. And so, it was really, and again, we were growing our understanding to be a personalized digital marketer. And that was the message to the industry, that this is coming. We are trying to take what's at the forefront of that and piece that together. What do you guys think? And in the next year, again, and then one of the other ones I'm very proud of, there was the work I did with Oreo on the 3D printer. Like, we literally took 3D printing experience there and merged that with what was trending on Twitter. So you could literally taste, culture through an Oreo. And that was really the precursor to looking at how do you take manufacturing and move it to the edge, just like edge computing was moving to the edge. Manufacturing moved to the edge, and that launched later on our personalized Oreo and ultimately our e-commerce business. So for me, it was always taking the best minds in the world and showing them what we see as the future. We did the first electronic shelves that changed the price tag based on temperature one of the years for Pepsi. I mean, like, really trying to see what people thought and get their feedback. You got the best brains on planet Earth. Like, why wouldn't you see if you can engage with them? We did startup, we did our 5G there. We launched the first women's in tech piece there. Anyway, sorry, I'm rambling now.
No, it's awesome. So it's also interesting, just from a global organization perspective, it sounds like, you not only had tremendous success, but would you say that they were supportive and it was an environment that enabled you to be disruptive? Because, you're pushing the envelope in a lot of different ways and kind of, creating fresh, innovative, ideas and experiences. Was that an environment that enabled you to do that?
The overall message answer to that is yes, of course. You can't get as much out of the organization as we got out of the organization if there wasn't support. But the reality is that I learned a bunch of philosophies, and you talked about global. I can go on what we did globally with Frito, and I mean, we can talk about all the global work I'm even prouder of, because we were doing in markets that didn't expect that. We also backed a lot of the big industry. We were the first backer of the Shorty Awards, first backer of Social Media Week, because we also wanted to be in the areas and support the folks that were bringing new stuff to life. We did the #Promise event, where we brought people who cared about the future of environment together, and digital and tracking of products from the beginning of when it was built. This is years before, we see it on TV now, but this is, but I learned a lot in terms of how you accomplish things in organizations. A lot of what I talk to people about. So first, there is, people look for alignment. Right, that's the worst thing. Like, you can't get people to align around where they should sit for Thanksgiving. I mean, you've seen the news. You watch, Curb Your Enthusiasm, and people argue about who should be middling. So I mean, and it's not about that. What I look out at is in a 110,000 person organization, to get alignment is near impossible, and that stops people a lot. I look for coalition of the willing. Who are the 5 or 6 people who believe in this so much that we're going to walk barefoot, and eventually it's going to become a religion. And then it'll take hold. So that's one. I think also the whack-a-mole theory. So I'm going to put enough innovation out in the market, in the organization, that even if they get hit, you can't hit them all. So some are going to get through. And then you also have to realize, how do you can't, if you can't swallow the elephant, then you got to try to swallow, the smaller bits of it bite by bite. And so what is the test and learn? And then the last piece I would say is, I'm a big believer of announcing where you're going, even if you don't know how you're going to get there. And most people try to wait for results to talk about it. But I look at Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth, he didn't always, every time he called a home run, he didn't always hit a home run. But the times he did, the crowd exploded. And so, but it also means that the organization has to now run behind that, right? And so we did a lot of that projecting of what we were going to do, even if we didn't have all the pieces. So I just feel like there's some strategies to get the organization to move, but ultimately you need support, but some days you're going to have it, some days you're not.
Yeah. I think Thomas Edison, famously declared a lot of, inventions before they were happening. And obviously Elon Musk does it all the time. So, I mean, and also I never looked at failure as failure. It's just like Edison, I didn't fail 10,000 times. I just learned 10,000 ways not to make a light bulb. Yeah, exactly. All right. So let's jump from PepsiCo to Mondelēz. Very similar, a lot of, very prominent global brands here that you're managing now as Chief Media Officer and head of e-commerce. So can you talk to us about, when you have, such prominent positions, how do you manage and great brands. How do you even begin to kind of create a strategic plan on how you can create impact on an organization like this?
Yeah, Mondelēz was different. First I had a great leader, Dana Anderson, and Irene again. But you had a organization that was much more first of all, I was taking on a role that to be quite frank, I knew nothing about. I had never bought a piece of television in my life.
Right.
And we were, I think, the 7th largest buyer in the world. And so they told me they wanted the future of media is digital. We want a digital guy to chart the future of media. That we chose you. And so I remember my first day, I said, hey, any advice? They said, don't screw it up. So I was like, okay, this is
right.
Yoda-like wisdom. For me, this was a learning curve for myself, but because I had such a broad investment opportunity, I knew that we could do a few things. And if we did a few things really well at scale, we could have tremendous impact. Yep. And so this was less, there's some whack-a-mole stuff in here, but this was less about that. And this was more about directing an investment that would have lasting impact. And realistically, underneath that was, we were at 3% spending in digital. By the time I left, we're at 32% spending globally. Yep. And that was the single biggest thing that I wanted to accomplish. And I also wanted to accomplish 10% in mobile spend. So I wanted us to be so far out ahead of where the competition was. And later we took on e-commerce. But so this began really with a journey of learning what is the cornerstone of buying media when you look at the majority of media that we were buying, which is really television. So first, it was simplifying the lines of communication. So we had 12 media agencies when I came in. And I reduced that to 2 because I knew I couldn't operate without friction if I had so many people that I had to touch. We had to restructure the actual team. But most importantly, I had to go get the buy-in from the regions. And so, I never forget, those were hard conversations. And basically people were like, no, we're not doing it. So I had to reset what I was saying to them. And so what I said to them was, okay, look, there's no way you can't tell me that you're not going to have a gap in your budget by the time you reach the end of the year. What if I could give you $50 million back? What if I could give you 20, depending on the region, back so you could backstop your gap? I'll deliver the same value creation, but you need to allow me to control the mix. And that changed the nature of conversation because I was giving a lot more than they were losing out on in terms of control. And so we did that. And then the other piece that we had to focus on was we couldn't do it in onesies and twosies. And that's what I think people don't understand. Like much as I love Facebook, I love YouTube, I love the startups more, but I couldn't invest the kind of money that I needed to by going startup by startup by startup by startup. So I had to rely on the really big guys to get it there. So we did really big spend. So first of all, I wanted to signal mobile. So we did the first ever mobile only deal with Google, which was a huge signal to the marketplace of where we were going. We also did the largest geographic Facebook deal, 52 countries. And then when I walked into the upfronts and it all depends on what you want to call them globally, every single one of those traditional platforms, we mandated a percentage of it in the upfront, which had not been done before, be spent in mobile. And then we also mandated that we have parity. Now they do this, but that we have parity so we could switch the media. So I gave ourselves out so that the regions didn't feel that they were stuck. So that we weren't paying more for OTT than what we were paying for mobile, than what we were paying for traditional TV. So we had parity spending. And then we also lowered the percentage of hard commitment that we had to have. And basically we said fewer, bigger, better. And we said, we're going to reduce the number of players we have so we could get these done. And if you aren't going to work with us on this, then you're going to be in the not in the fewer. So you guys got to make some decisions. So that was kind of a different learning curve. And I brought, to be very honest, I brought in a number of people who really helped me kind of understand, how to accomplish this in the fastest possible. And HMI was very, very helpful for me on this journey. So anyway, we can so that's kind of what we did. And then I think we put in against, I fixed some of the some of the stuff that I've learned and failed on, like we changed PEP 10, and we made it so that there was guaranteed investment, guaranteed timeline. So we weren't burning startups, but we did that in 8 countries around the globe. And we were putting out, tons of test and learns. And again, Bill Konigsberg from the media standpoint, really, really, he just helped me see the world in a different way. And so I owe him a lot. And of course, all the work that Halverson did and Media Fest and Dentsu and all those teams, Melissa. I mean, it was a real team effort. And then all the folks inside, Laura Henderson, we really banded together to see if we could move this ship. And then you saw the US come out, and Mark came out and said, we're going to get to 50%. And then that was all the other regions, And so, and again, as a result of that shift, we added $2 billion of top line net revenue, 300 million to the bottom line. And we also changed the entire way we plan, and we focused on connections planning and every piece of media connected. And we did workshops. I mean, we really dug in. It was a different ballgame because of the level of investment.
The real interesting thing is, people talk about the shift from traditional, from TV, broadcast to digital. And the evolution, as you said, you moved from 3 or 4% to 32, 33% or so. And then as much as 50%, as you said. So what, we all live in the digital world, but in your mind, having such a real, direct, experience, what are the benefits to investing in digital media, and also such a significant, transition from linear to digital? What are some of the benefits that you gain from that?
Look, and some of those investments have been right size, right? Some of them were too much.
Yeah.
And the reality is that we moved to where the consumer was already going. And so what people don't realize, if I came into your office in the 1950s and I said, look, I want you to invest in this thing called television. You tell me to get out. You say this thing called radio works well. I don't need your stinking television. But 3 bold brands, P&G, Unilever, and Kraft, saw that consumer consumption eclipsed where investment was. And they saw that delta opportunity. And they created a competitive advantage that lasted them 60, 70 years, still to this day. And that's the difference, is seeing the consumer consumption delta. And again, I believe messaging is in that same place right now. And so that's where I think it wasn't, like we were just literally moving to where the consumer was, and we were building the skill sets along. But TV is a centerpiece to engagement. Like, don't get me wrong, television is a powerful medium. Even more powerful if it's connected to a communication strategy. So when you look at like the work we did on graham crackers, which was the most shared ad in the world, that we did it was an entire connected experience that wasn't, about just that piece, but that piece was the driver, but it had all the other pieces connected to it. And so that's where we learned a lot around connections planning. We brought in just a lot of people to help us think about it, workshop it. I mean, we taught all the groups, we put connection planners in every single, we really changed the capability skill set. And I wasn't aware, because look, even at PepsiCo, even then the digital was important, but it wasn't, we were running consumer engagement for the brands, totality around the globe, And so every single way that the brand engaged with the consumer, we were responsible for. And so that was a much bigger, broader remit. And I had to learn a lot about how do you really train an organization? Like, how do you really instill a capability? Not just how do you build a digital group, but how do you actually shift the mindset of the people who control the brand? That was a big learning experience. I'm very grateful I had it.
It's interesting what you say about, when you follow the customer was already there, and you put it in that context, then everyone, sees the vision and sees the context of which you're trying to meet the customer. It's less about moving it from, linear to digital or whatever it is. It's how do we create great customer and brand experiences, right?
And you got to also rely on partners that feel like they can accomplish it. And they can accomplish it at the pace and scale that you need to. And I will say, like with Twitter, we put Twitter offices inside of Brazil, New York. We built the first Twitter office that was in India inside of our India office. So we were learning from them just through osmosis, as well as through planned training sessions. Facebook, we built totally different teams of how we were going to connect around the globe. We built the 6-second labs with Google, so that we could look. So the partners were important. They did a lot because, we're controlling, 5 different regions, every market, we operate more markets than the UN.
Awesome. Okay, very cool. Actually, one more question about this. So, you were also the head of, e-commerce, I believe. And so, what did, for CPG brands like this, what does e-commerce mean, and what were you, what were you able to achieve there?
What did it mean then, or what does it mean now? I think that then, when I took on e-commerce, we were at 65, and I think when I left 18 months later, it was 265, and we grew quickly. But what e-commerce meant then was first of all, it became the growth plan for 50% of our total growth over the next 5 years, or at least that was charted. So it definitely became, and that's the largest snack food company in the world. So it definitely became a growth component for us.
Yeah.
But it also became a mindset component for us, and it changed look, what became very clear is that it's a sales channel, whether we understood whether it's substantial or not at the time. We believed it was going to be, but it's a sales channel that needs the same dedicated resources from supply chain to packaging, everything on down, and that it wasn't this tag on that you could do. And so that was the learning curve during that time period, right? And so what was interesting is we had a summit in China, right? And we are waking up the next morning, and we're going to go to Alibaba. And one of our key executives, called me 6 a.m. and said, "Hey man, I really got to take this other meeting." I said, "Man, you got to come. Like I get it, but you got to come." So I talked them into it. Mm-hmm. So we arrive at Alibaba, and it's the number 2 at the time.
Yeah.
And they're just starting really to engage big brands like us. And so we sit down, and Cindy Chen is running ecom, by the way. She's amazing. She's now president of Reckitt. They said, we said, okay, because we would be in a room for months charting out a strategy, but so we wanted to see what their thoughts were. So we asked them, what should we sell? No, first of all, how much do you think we can make this year on Alibaba? We're thinking somewhere like 5 million. He said, 100 plus. We're like, oh, okay. Then we go, what should we sell? He goes, here, let me help you. You just take all the products you have, put a bunch in a shipping container, send it here. Whatever we sell the most of, send more of that. And it was like, okay, we would have been like, category chocolate they're indulgent. He was like, look, this is e-commerce, dude. Like the numbers will tell you it all. Totally different mindset. And then we were like, how should we price it? He said, give me the lowest you're willing to sell it, and the highest you think somebody will pay, and whatever they pay, let's sell it for that. And it was just really basic stuff, and you're like, got it. That's a whole different mindset, So now you have to think about, if I'm gonna do that, how does that affect channel strategy? So package has to be, so it just built at that time. What e-commerce really meant was building a totally new capability for the organization that, we were sure it was gonna be a thing, but it's like, you're building a rocket ship. You don't know when it's actually gonna take off, but that we're gonna get to space at some point. Cut to now, I think that brands that did it and focused on it understand the power of it post-pandemic, or I mean, still in pandemic. And I think many brands that neglected it feel the pain of its neglect. And that's the, and I think that the next wave of this is really going to be what we were trying to push, especially with the personalized Oreo that we did, which, by the way, we sold. It was a rocket ship. When it got to China, I mean, in the US, we kind of failed. We got the CAC wrong. There was a bunch of stuff. When it got to Brazil, it took off. But when it got to China, it was a rocket ship. And fortunately, I was gone by then. But I saw, all folks shared with me. The next wave of this is really going to be, how do you create products that adjust to the needs of consumers in real time? Like, this is going to sound like whatever, but when SodaStream first came out, we had a beverage called Sobe Life Water when I was at PepsiCo. And I made a suggestion. I said, hey, why don't we look at this SodaStream thing? Because it's life water. Imagine if we could ship you, more electrolytes, more this, and you could actually put it in this thing and make your beverage for you with your actual, that could change to who you are and how you're feeling for the day. And we didn't do it until much later when they bought it for $8 billion. It was much cheaper. But those were the kind of, I think that's the piece that we're seeing emerge, but we're going to see emerge even more. Is that additional level of personalization, and the big guys are going to figure that next wave out. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let's jump ahead because you talked about mobile, and I want to get into Lockstep Ventures and Bonin Ventures to begin. So could you talk about the investments or where you're spending your time and
we don't need to. I mean, I love all the children except, of course, my wife's business, which is Tiny Organic. I love more. Fastest growing baby food business. So watch out for those guys. And if you if you do have kids, it's solids. So it's when the baby moves over from, well, it's expanding, of course, but when baby moves over from purees or liquid over to solids, there's a lot of, so it's all natural, flash frozen, fresh. There's just a lot of amazing pieces in terms of the convenience for mom, the level of knowledge base they share with mom. It's a crazy time because the kid's choking and all these kind of things, learning how to eat. And so anyway, so that's a great business. If anybody wants them, we're gonna give my phone number out. Text me. I'll put you on the sample list. All of these on here are amazing companies. We have Wilkinson Baking, which is it's an automated baking machine where every 6 minutes a fresh loaf of bread comes out. But really, again, that is kind of, it's taking what we did with the 3D printed Oreo and really showing that so the average retailer makes about 10 cents on a loaf of bread, and it usually costs anywhere from $4 anyway. So they can take the cost of production and distribution because they move it to the front down from $2.50 to $25. So 25% reduction. They can take from 10 cents to $2.50 that they can make. So a 25% increase in profitability for a loaf of bread, which is literally the best thing since sliced bread, which is crazy. And so, what's funny is, well, not funny, but Betty White and my father were same age. And I guess sliced bread came out after both of those people. So that's anyway, all of these, I won't go through every single one of these. They're all great companies. Go ahead.
Can you talk about I know you've been really emphatic about mobile messaging and the impact of and the mobile consumer experiences and how much time consumption how much all of us spend and what our attention span is towards mobile. So can you talk about why is it that you're so passionate about, mobile consumer experiences?
Yeah, and all these investments have a bent, most of them around messaging. Tiny Organic started with a messaging platform. Superfo is a marketing messaging platform where one of the CMOs that I introduced it to, a retailer, electronics retailer, big one, actually, very big one, called me the summer of COVID and said, and they had only introduced it to a few of their sales folks. And basically my whole thing with these guys were, I know that all your sales folks text, and they were like, no way. I said, well, if you're a good salesperson and you're trying to sell a range oven, you probably won't close day of, but you're not gonna let that person walk away after spending an hour. So we created a little thing we created a pretty substantial engagement component called Never Lose Touch. And the salesperson could enter some information about their conversation and then set up an automated response, which if they hadn't heard from the person in the week, it'll send something like, hey, still interested in the range, yada, yada, yada. Well, they had rolled it out to a portion of the sales force. And then when COVID hit, they rolled it out to everybody. And that summer he called me and said, man, thank you. You are a big part of the reason why we still have a business today, because they were able to pivot the way their salespeople engage with consumers. Snaps, Pop Wallet, Canary, which is, and 1Q, which is basically being able to do real-time consumer data information pulls. It's amazing. When I show the demo, I sit people down. We ask 1,000 people a question, consumers a question. You see the map start filling in with people answering. All the people who are getting text and responding and answering, and basically changes what would take months into less than a half hour to do. But for me, the reason why I say that is that the most amount of human attention today is spent in messaging, but still less than 1% of investment goes into it. And the fact that somebody is willing to give you their phone number or a way to become a part of what ultimately is the feed of their life, that is the most personal space. That means they really want to have a relationship with you. And we need to figure out, how are those relationship experiences going to progress beyond just, hey, here's a free thing, that thing, but actually, how are we turning those into true utility, experiences for the consumer? And that, I believe, is going to be a huge market. It's already big. I mean, you look at companies like Attentive and how fast they've grown. But the other piece I see there is that whatever exists, and this was the thesis when I quit, whatever exists for ad tech today will have to exist for message tech tomorrow. And so there's still a lot of white space in my belief, everything from payments to, video to, I just think there's a lot of piece there.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. So another passion of yours is equitable ownership. So can you talk to us about what is equitable ownership and what does it mean to you, and how are you, investing your time and energy into that?
Yeah, Michael, I rambled, so feel free not to have to hit all the points.
That's okay.
Q&A, but look, equitable ownership. Michael Loeb, who's been a good friend and a mentor, and in some cases a father figure, in the family. I mean, so we talked in the wake of everything that happened with George Floyd, and this was immediately. I mean, literally the Tuesday, I believe, or even maybe the Monday. And he just said, "What is going on?" And I said, "I know, man, it's crazy out there." And it's funny because, I talked to my dad, who's 93, and we had just watched everything happen on Thursday. Friday, rioting in the streets. I live on 7th Avenue. They were coming from our block. Saturday, we saw cars burning on our block. And I'm just like, you know what? We got to protest, burn it down, because I haven't seen any change. Sunday, I see my friend's store in the East Village that had gotten, all the stores on the block had gotten broken into, or glass broken, except for his, which had my dad's photos in the window. So I took my dad's photos back, but I realized, we just can't tear it down. But then Sunday we're tear gassing people. Monday we're tear gassing people in the streets of DC, which was insanity for a photo op. And then Tuesday, black squares are everywhere. And I said to my dad, I said, "Hey man, what do you think?" He's like, "Nothing ever changes." And it was sad to see a guy who was 93 years old, who lived almost a century, to say that, who came from Chicago in 1927, who was on the Chitlin circuit, who was discriminated against as a black photographer in the 60s. I mean, like, to just say that we still, nothing changes, we're just not making progress. And that, I think everybody felt that. It was sad to hear it from my dad, because I hope that in 100 years he would have seen more progress. But Michael called and we just said, "Okay, we got to do something." And he said, "What can we do?" And he said, he told me, "I want to invest in African-American founders." And I said, "Yeah." I said, I said, "Let me think a little bit about it." And we talked the next day, and I said, "I want to do that, but can we do it in a way that, to address the real issues that perpetuate racial inequality?" And that was criminal justice reform, healthcare outcomes, education reform, and financial literacy. And the goal was to not focus on those that have access, but to really find those entrepreneurs that are middle America, that don't have access, that think about this, most of those type of entrepreneurs, they fought to get to where they are. They didn't have friends and family as the first round. They basically made it from winning $1 and investing $1, like that's how they got to where they are. So they bitten their own arm off and beat somebody with it to get to where they, so, now if we can put some scaffolding around them and help structure it so they can be prepared for venture backing, and I think we can have, but most important of it is we need to have economic outcomes, because the greater the economic outcome, the more likely we're going to have systemic impact over time. And so that was the real thesis. And we also need to attack the problems in more creative ways. So I use the example, one of the first companies that we had talked to during this was an ice cream company. And the person who headed the ice cream company, who started it, formerly incarcerated, started an ice cream company when he came back because he couldn't get access to a job. And he had a dream to create ice cream shops in places where there were large prisons, because he wanted to give the people who were returning, who want to attack recidivism, the people who are returning, give them access to, to a job, but more importantly, not go back directly to the place where they came from with no economic needs. And so if we could turn that into the Ben and Jerry's of this generation, could we have outsized impact on recidivism? And so that's the things that drive Lockstep. And we call it Lockstep. I mean, to be quite frank, Katie Loeb, who named it Lockstep, and Marcus, who runs it, but Katie named it with a really broader mission, which is how do we bring a lot of parties together in lockstep to help some of this vision come to life. And so the work we're doing there, I'm very proud of, and happy anybody who's interested in participating or being in the fund, happy to have conversations with you. Please reach out. But it's been a pretty great journey. In fact, we had the chance to work with incarcerated citizens about 2 months ago, we went to a prison in Chicago,
Yeah.
and just a transformational moment. This is my second time having done that, but yeah, man. So it's, and look, I'm using that, but healthcare, financial literacy, I mean, these are all as important topics. If we're going to change, equitable opportunity and ownership. And, I mean, because the current state of investment is, less than 1% goes to these type of entrepreneurs. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's inspiring, and as you said, you should be proud. And certainly delighted to see you having a great impact in a place that really needs it most. And as you're saying, really applying capitalistic support to enable the acceleration and to have an outside impact, as you said.
I mean, we know how to solve problems. Corporate America, well, we might create a lot, we also solve a lot, especially when it has to do with our bottom line. So if we can set up, a focus on a bottom line, then we can change, and look, we're a small drop in the pond, but, hopefully we can be a beacon for others to kind of follow.
Yeah, that's really cool. All right, so let's talk about, we have a little bit short on time here, but we'll talk about the, as you call that, hackonomy.
Yeah, do you want to go to questions instead? I'm happy to start with questions and then.
Sure. Let's actually jump to your book.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, look, I'll give hackonomy. Really, the idea is to create value by breaking things. What I talk about, and you can watch some of the videos online, is I talk about breaking your organization, breaking its process, and most importantly, breaking your mindset. And that's, I think, the hardest thing is like hackers. And the reason why I like that word, and I know it has some negative connotation and different perspectives, but they wake up to challenge what they did yesterday to reinvent anew. And that's what we have to do. And how do you build that muscle memory to constantly do that? And I think that that's, the hardest thing, but also the thing that propels growth the most. And yeah, I wrote a book called Text Me 646-759-1837. It is, the funny thing was when I wrote it, I wanted to write a book that would change publishing. And I found a publisher who said, yeah, I want to change publishing. And we wrote the book. It's 120 interviews with everybody from Dick Costello to Peter Guber to Chopra to folks in between. And it's meant to be the Freakonomics of the mobile generation. It looks at the untalked about, undiscussed impact that mobile's had on every aspect of life, from dating to religion to parenting to purchasing to memory and more. When we were done writing the book, I realized we didn't change publishing, although I love the book. We just wrote another 140-page book. So we had this idea that, and originally the title was Digilance, and it was supposed to be this big book. So we had the idea to change the title and call it Text Me, put my phone number on the cover, so anybody who saw it, bought it, or read it could actually engage. And then the sub became your phone changed your life. Let's talk about it. And I put my face on the cover of the book so that you knew I was a real person. And I'll tell you, when I went and told the publisher this, they said, "Get out. We're not gonna." So I bought the rights back. And we published it. And it's been the best thing I've ever done. Today, I text with over 50,000 people. Usually I read some stories, but if you text me now and you put in #ExecutiveLounge, I'm happy to send you a digital copy of the book. And then it'll, that little piece will be automated just to make it easy on me. But after that, you'll be talking to me.
Awesome. So to repeat that, as you can see, #ExecutiveLounge. And so I'm sure as everyone's asking, how does this work? How do you handle, so many people, how's it set up for customer experiences for so many people to text you? How does this work?
The reality is that what you get is you get a burst when you do something like this. So you just got to be prepared for that. And then after that, it becomes relative. The real secret of this is there's a lot of drop off. So, either you answer a person's question, you get really good at slowing conversations to a halt. No, just kidding. But just getting to what people want to understand. They understand that you're texting with a lot of people. What is it? What's the key thing that, and then helping answer that. And then the reality becomes a lot of drop off. So.
Okay, cool. Well, very, very cool. And you have, in fact, disrupted the publisher industry right there. So we have about 5 minutes left here. And actually, there's an interesting question here with regards to the hackonomy. David Harris is asking, what are the biggest opportunities that you see in the economy today? What are your thoughts around restaurants, automotive, hospitality? So, talk to us about where you see opportunities for the hackonomy.
Right. Yeah. So I just read that. Look, I think the restaurant business is always is just reality. It's a hard business.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I did say to a lot of the restaurants that we basically ate, I would say almost every single day, dinner at least, at one of the local restaurants to try to support the local restaurants. I have a lot of friends that are restaurant owners, so we would visit them as well. And what I would tell all the restaurants during that time period was collect people's phone numbers, because it's nice and warm out now, but when that winter comes, guys, the winter is coming. And so this way you have a relationship and you remind them how loyal you were to them. And, you know, hopefully, and you have a chance to reach out to them and you can change your menu, stuff like that. So I do believe that, you know, Tap On It, which is one of the companies that is in the portfolio, which does do text-based, they do both sides of the coin, but one of their first products was text-based local ads, helped to drive those communities in a big way during that time period. And more importantly, they continue to do that. They did it before, but now they're at just much bigger scale. So I definitely think they're interesting, but I definitely think that owning that one-to-one relationship is super important. And I don't think that enough physical establishments do that. And so that's where I think that restaurants have a chance. And if you look, the dirty secret is Target started capturing your phone number. You know, Walgreens is now capturing your phone number. So like, if it's good enough for them, guess what? And you're much more interesting, much more probably tailored to the likes of that consumer, or at least the geographical nature of that consumer. So I have a much better chance, I think, of gaining value out of it. And then the other piece, and I know I got to be quiet quickly, is I think the automotive industry, you know, I think that there's an opportunity to show more diversity in who's the actual car buyer. And I just think that in a world where, you know, we have a mosaic of cultures, a mosaic of, you know, pigments, you know, a mosaic of interests, I feel that the automotive communications world has been the same world forever. You know, you see the car driving around you know, that doesn't really say that it's a part of my lifestyle, because, you know, I might not like to drive around a bend, you know, at 100 miles an hour, you know. So how do you figure out some of those pieces? And then on the hospitality piece, I think on hospitality, you know, you're going to win to some extent. You know, look, again, there's a lot of pricing pieces, but I think there's a lot of experiential pieces. So you look at a lot of the hotels, and the ones that have moved to like, oh, here's the Instagram wall, like, you know, they are, and whether that's the experience you want to create, or if there's a different experience to create. And even if it's like local Scotch bar with just the, you know, I don't know, but experiences that are tailored where it's something memorable and I choose to stay there. Like when I go, you know, to Texas, I'm like, or to Dallas, I'm like Hotel Zaza. There was an experience that I had there years ago, and they continue to, you know, so I think that that's for me there. Okay.
So we have one last question. So maybe just briefly, we have a lot of, you know, agency leaders and also marketing and tech, you know, founder CEOs on, you know, as our audience. Any advice? You know, you've been on both sides. You've been running agencies and also, you know, CMO and other, you know, head of e-commerce and you know, chief media officer. You know, any advice that you give in terms of how agencies can be successful with large, you know, global, you know, brands and conglomerates like who you've worked with, PepsiCo, Mondelēz, and others?
I think I tell this to everybody. I think that and this is going to sound so inappropriate, and most people will never admit this. I think the singular biggest thing to understand is the real objective of the people who you're working with. So at the end of the day, everybody wants to do great work. There's no question about that. But the brand marketer is fighting for a job. So they're trying to figure out, how are every decision I make going to help progress my career? Not just progress the business, but mutually beneficial. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that most sales folks go in and say, this is going to drive your business. And that's where they stop. The reality is that if you can bring in the other side and help them understand how it's actually going to help them progress through the organization, then they're going to be more likely to listen to you. And many people forget that they're in there trying to do that for their career, you know, on the agency side or on the supplier side. And yet they forget that that's the mission of the person on the other side as well. And so having a little bit more of the empathy of what the real objective, because they don't get up just to go to work to sell Oreos. They get up to go to work to become CEO, you know?
Exactly. To grow and to have more influence within, you know, wherever they are. So Great advice. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time here, but really appreciate this. Has been, really, inspiring in terms of all the, impactful work that you're having. So really appreciate that. Appreciate that you're taking the time to share all your insights. You've had such a wealth of experience and illustrious career. And so, congratulations on all your success, on a successful book, and everything that you're doing with Lockstep Ventures and with Michael Loeb. So, thanks so much for joining us. It's really been a pleasure.
It's my pleasure. Good night, everybody. And cheers to you, Michael, and all the great work that you've done and the fact that you allow people to have a platform to share. Even though, I didn't have a scotch, I will this weekend. All right.
Yep. And reminding everyone to hashtag Executive Lounge to interact directly with Bonin and to get a free copy of your book.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael and Bonin, for the amazing conversation. Just a reminder, everybody tuning in can watch the full-length recording of this on Monday on MadisonAlley.tv. You can share it with your friends or anyone who may have missed today's session. And while you're at MadisonAlley.tv, be sure to sign up for our next event in the Executive Lounge with the Managing Director and CMO of KPMG, Miss Lauren Boyman, which will be taking place on March 16th. Thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.